feet higher than everybody else. So, and normally I'm pretty warm-blooded anyhow. I want to share a thought. Maybe it helps us appreciate blessings because, as I'd mentioned to start with, our thermostat battery needed replacing and whatnot. And so we got in here as it was a chilly auditorium. I had mentioned Dale and Tammy Wanden, how 20 by 20 foot cabin he built, and that no running water, no electricity, no indoor plumbing. But they do have a shower, but it's not indoors. And so it's outdoors in a little tent. Well, how does that work? There's no plumbing. Well, he goes to the well, wherever that is, gets 5 gallons of water, brings it over the tent. You know these little garden, you pump up little garden sprayers? That's it. So, man, I tell you what, I don't know if I'd be showering till June, but it just helps us appreciate. We're blessed by God. We appreciate people with such overcoming, pioneering attitudes. As I thought about a lesson for today, here is a thing where as we think about Jesus, I thought I would like us to talk about Jesus, but I'd like to look at his life in maybe a way we have thought about, but only a little bit. I call this lesson the Jesus paradox. A paradox is something that is seemingly impossible to be. It's a contradiction in terms, but in closer inspection you say, oh, wait a minute. The shortness was only in my vision, not in the reality, and there's deeper truths within that picture. This week, 2.5 billion of the world's population will enjoy observing these winter holidays in some degree or another. But you begin thinking about some of these things. How could it be that the Lion of Judah is also the Lamb of God? How could it be that Jesus would be fully human and fully divine? How can you have both of those things going on at the same time? I want us to look at a half a dozen of these things, and it helps us appreciate the plan of God, the wisdom of God, the person of Jesus Christ. When we think about this idea of the Jesus paradox, there's something we could think about as we weigh this. Is Jesus fully divine and fully human? How can you be both of those things at the same time? Different religions have treated it and said, well, we think Jesus was fully human and not much divine at all. It just kind of had a good spiritual attitude. It was a good teacher and things such as that. Other people say, no, he just totally deity and only appeared to be humanity. So he was deity but wasn't humanity at all. And so it's just kind of like a holograph and just kind of a picture of it. In Isaiah chapter 9 and in verse 6, it says, a son will be given to us, and his name will be called the Mighty God, the Prince of Peace. Isaiah, about 750 years before Christ, saying, you got all these kings, and they've just, 2/3 of them anyhow, been a lost cause, just into all the wrong things in leadership. Well, we think about our nation. All our presidents have been spectacular, right? Not even. Well, yeah, but if you lived in a different country, their presidents and rulers and dictators, those guys are spectacular. No, they're just people. And 3/4 of the time, crummy decisions. He said, but I'll tell you, there's a ruler coming, and the government will be on his shoulders. And in Isaiah 7:14, and a virgin will bear a child and call his name Emmanuel, God with us. In Colossians chapter 2 and verse 9, in him all the fullness of deity dwells in bodily form. Isaiah makes the promise. And the Apostle Paul talks about the fulfillment of that promise. Fully God in human form. In Philippians chapter 2 and verse 7, Christ emptied himself, taking the form of a bondservant and being made in the likeness of men. Sometimes I think about what would it be like if God wanted to say, I'm feeling twitchy and itchy now, even thinking about saying this. If God said, Paul, I want you to go down and we want to save the insect world. And we want you to be a bed bug. I can't. I'm itchy just thinking about it. If they need saving, I'm not the one that wants to go down there. I don't want to look like one. I don't want to eat their food, talk their stuff. I don't want to be them. I don't want to interact with them. I want to be where I am. God said they need help. And we can see that sense of humanity coming down and being a bed bug. It was a trillion unimaginable number greater than that. Jesus leaving the heavenly realm to come down and save us. Me, who didn't deserve it. In Matthew 1 and verse 16, by Mary was born Jesus, who is called Christ. Matthew 9 and verse 6, he references how the Son of Man has authority to forgive. I did the research. That phrase, Son of Man, is used 100 times. Actually, it's used about 109 times in the Old Testament, just emphasizing the prophet's own humanity. He says, Son of Man, do this and this and this. Jesus was both deity and Son of Man in one identity. So one person and two natures. To save us. He said, yep. You go, wow. Because we magnify his name, not just on one day, not just on Sunday, but on every day. The Jesus paradox. When we think about how the impossible becomes possible with God, how could there be an eternal Jesus? In John 8:58, Jesus says, before Abraham was, I am. He said, Paul, where were you before Abraham? Man, I wasn't at his time, before his time, in his time. Jesus said, you take any point in time, and I am before that. In John 1:1, John says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God, and the Word was with God. And so you go as far back in eternity as is humanly imaginable. Jesus was there then and part of God's plan. And yet, in all of eternity, I was talking with a young man, a neighbor that wanted to talk about God yesterday. And so I had, a day before yesterday, had met him and we talked about this idea of God in eternity. And yet, being eternal, he was born in time. In Galatians chapter 4 and in verse 4, in the fullness of time, God sent forth his Son, born of a woman, born under the law. And so if you think, well, if Adam was formed and God said, here's Jesus, I would say, what's that? At any other place, if you have repressive governments and such as this, but when the Roman Empire had control of the world and was an oppressive and tyrannical government, they also had Roman roads, Roman postal system, and Roman law. And that allowed Jesus and therefore the apostles to spread the gospel in that early world. The paradox of Jesus is seen in other ways too. For instance, as creator of all. In John chapter 1 and in verse 3, through him all things were made, and without him nothing was made that has been made. So when we think about as creator, and I just have kind of a sparkling universe out there, I like that picture, the idea of a universe. But as I think about the vastness of it, and we talk about here's our various space telescopes that go out there. And we talk about being able to consider things at the edge of the universe. We know that the universe is expanding actually in all directions and is not slowing down but is speeding up. And when we say the edge of the universe, we don't actually know what the edge is. We only know as far as we can see. For instance, I got pretty good eyesight. Yeah? How good? I can look out over the ocean and I see the edge. What does that mean? Well, you see what anybody else can see. But is there any more? Oh, yeah, you can keep on going. I mean, it doesn't stop out there 60 miles and that's it. There's the rest of the world. If you think about Jesus creating everything, all the planets, all the stars, all the galaxies, all the nebula, everything, Jesus said, I created that. And interestingly, in Colossians 1 and verse 16, all things have been created by him and for him. And so when we think about individuals' creativity, and that Jesus didn't say, well, I just kind of made stuff, I had no good reason. He said, no, I wanted to bless you. But when we look at the power and the beauty of the universe, it honors him as well. And yet created. You say, well, how do you mean that? From the physical realm, Hebrews chapter 10 and in verse 5, but a body thou hast prepared for me. And so I hadn't much thought about that before I was aware of the verse, but I hadn't thought about that Jesus said the body was prepared, not that I prepared, but it was prepared. And so here is that physical realm. And in John 1:14, after he said, here was the Word, and the Word was God, and the Word was with God. And then in verse 14 he says, and the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. I like thinking about an illustration I came across years ago. It's just man-made, but it is on that same idea. If you had to talk to something of another species but couldn't communicate in the language that it understood. 20 years ago, I mentioned a story about a guy who was not a believer, and his family was spiritual, but he wasn't. And so here's December 25th, and they're all gone, and it's a terrible stormy day, and snow is swirling and whatnot, and here's thump, thump, thump against the windows, and the little sparrows are trying to get away from the storm, and they're seeking refuge in the house, but the windows and walls are blocking them. And he thought, you know what I'll do is I've got a barn. I'm going to open the barn doors and see if I can get the wild birds to take refuge in there. Well, they didn't know they're supposed to go in there, and so he's out there waving his arms, trying to get birds to go in a barn, and they don't understand. That would really help them, but they don't appreciate that. And in this man-made story, the church bells ring down in the valley, and he begins thinking about, you know, if I could speak the bird's language, if I was a bird and could tell them, come, there's safety, I am here to save you. If I could only be like them. And then in this story, he thought about Jesus the Christ. Because that's what he did. He took on a form like us so he could talk to us and say, where is salvation? Where is safety? The Jesus paradox. And then the idea of being omnipresent, being present everywhere at all times. And in Matthew chapter 18, verse 20, Jesus said, where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, there I am in the midst of them. And yet, he who is eternal and creator and God could be localized in hundreds of places, but here in Matthew 4:18 and 19, walking by the Sea of Galilee, he saw 2 brothers, Peter and Andrew, and said to them, follow me. And just like he asked them to follow, he asked us to follow him as well. And so we get to think about, I'm willing to do that. I want to do that. I want to be like he wants me to be. The Jesus paradox, that not only creator, not only eternal and omnipresent, but all powerful. Isaiah 9 and verse 6 that we cited earlier, but that he was God in Isaiah 9:6, and that son will be born to us, and his name shall be called the mighty God, the powerful God. And Hebrews 1 verse 3 says how he upholds all things by the word of his power, or by his powerful word. The laws that exist, the Bible says he made them exist. Why we exist with all the physical components that we do, Jesus Christ determined that. And yet, all powerful and in a physical way limited. Matthew chapter 4 and verse 2. After 40 days, that is in the wilderness, he became hungry. John chapter 4 and verse 6. Being wearied from his journey, he sat by the well. And so he knew both sides of that story. What it is to be all powerful and what it's like to have our own shortcomings, so he could talk to us about being strong. The Jesus paradox. As the giver of life, in John 10:28, I came that they may have life and have it abundantly. In John 3:15, whoever believes in him may have eternal life. That's why we're here. We love God. We want to be with God. And as I talk to people sometimes, think about if there is no God, none at all, never is, never was one. Mankind not only is an accident, it's useless. We just happen to be like a leaf fluttering off here we had fall, and my yard still have some leaves laying around here and there. What's a leaf mean? What doesn't mean anything. Just clutter I'm going to throw away and get rid of and turn into mulch. But it doesn't mean anything. There is no right and wrong. There's no good and bad. It's just an accident. But the giver of life himself was killed. In Matthew 27:35, and they crucified him. John 19:27, and he said, it is finished. And he bowed his head and gave up his spirit. And so each one of us has the joy and the blessing of living for a little while. And we want to make the best of it. We want to be the best we can in it. We want to become better, bless others, and honor God. But the reality, there's an end to that particular story. And as you get to be 9,000 years old, you think about that. And is that depressing? No. As long as you share your faith with others and you can see them growing and flourishing and doing better, and they're going to share with their children. Because friendship never ends. We get to meet again on heaven's shore. And that's part of the Jesus paradox. And he who is creator and all-powerful and all-present is the judge of all. In 2 Corinthians 5 and in verse 10, for we must all appear before the judgment seat of Christ. John 5:22, the Father has given all judgment to the Son, that all may honor the Son. So he gets to judge all of us. And yet, interestingly, the judge was judged. In Luke 23 and verse 4, Pilate said, I find no guilt in the man. Yet the Jewish council, their supreme court, the Sanhedrin, in Matthew 26 and down in verse 59, kept trying to obtain false testimony against Jesus in order that they might put him to death. Isn't that interesting? The author of life, they killed. The judge of all was judged. And maybe additionally surprising, because the Jesus paradox includes the fact that Jesus was sinless. In Hebrews chapter 4 and verse 15, how he was tempted in all points as we, yet without sin. 1 John 3:5, he appeared so that he might take away sin, and in him was no sin. What would that be like if we said, okay, snap our fingers and said, everybody in this room, 100 people, from now on, it's not, I'm going to try real hard and do better. I'll never sin again. You spread those wings and fly. Why can you think like that? Because that's what God has planned for us on heaven's shore. And Jesus showed it, what it was like in him. And yet, how did the world see him? They viewed him as sinful. Isaiah 53 and verse 12. He was counted with the transgressors. Yeah, here's this rotten guy and that criminal, and then there's Jesus. Yeah, they're all in the paddy wagon headed off to jail. John 8:48, Jesus said, the Jews said of Jesus, you are a Samaritan, have a demon. He said, you guys don't even know God. And they said, yeah, well, we're going to tell you, buddy, we don't even think you're a real Jew. Besides that, you're probably demon-possessed. And so that's how they saw him, or at least was willing to express that. In John 9:24, the Pharisee says, we know this man is a sinner. Well, the reality is they didn't know that, and he wasn't. That was their position. So, as we end this lesson, think about this. What's the question? Is it your destiny, salvation, depression, guilt, friendships, money, anger, worry, your future, or, gotten kind of scratchy here, or a broken heart? The reality is it doesn't matter what your question is. The answer is Jesus. He changes it all. He changes us, our hearts, our destiny. Everything about us has changed because of what Jesus has done and done in us. If you're here this morning and you say, you know what, I'm ready to make that change, or I made the change and I haven't been living as I should, and you're ready to be restored and would like the prayers of the saints, we're going to be singing this song. And if you're courageous enough, actually it's a little warmer standing up, won't you be standing? If you choose to, we'll be singing song 788, Wonderful Words of Light. Brother Jim.